So last summer was my first time in Proctor. I got invited to go to Proctor and tell a story. And I was nervous, of course, first time storytelling, but not nearly as nervous as I am today in front of the hometown crowd. Way over at Proctor, it seemed pretty removed. And there were some people I knew there, but just smattering rather than this crowd, which I know more of you than that I don't know.
Just think you'll bury us all. So.
I was about to say that, but...
So, I want you to cast your mind back, if you were around, to the early 70s in the Slocan River Valley. And if you weren't, I'll paint a little picture for you. Common with many rural places in North America at that time, there was an immigration of mostly young, mostly urban people to the Slocan Valley. And that group of people was characterized or had several names going. Probably the most common name they used for themselves was Back to the Landers. The most commonly used name was the term hippie, usually preceded with the adjective damn. But my personal favorite of this group of people was you people. You before you people came, things were much better, needless to say. And it's my personal favorite because it's absolutely universal. It can be used at any time against any group, and you don't lay yourself open to any semantical arguments from anybody. But somebody said earlier that sometime that the storyteller was going to be up telling stories about Corky Evans. Well, certainly my story includes some stuff about Corky Evans, and thinking about that particular movement of people in the Slocan Valley, he said it once in a letter that was sent off during a period of organization, talking about the Slocan Valley. Historically, the lower Slocan Valley has experienced decades of intensive immigration, widely separated by times of zero or negative growth. This pattern has resulted in a somewhat fractionalized community. So I thought that was a very sweet way of putting what was happening in the early Slocan Valley, in the Slocan Valley in the 1970s with the influx of the damned hippies. So in common with many other groups of young people moving to rural areas at the time, we were creating a community, creating culture, building things, building homes or repairing old ones, starting a daycare, having home births, starting a community school, a library, various institutions. And one of those things is a bit of a foreshadowing of the development of the Burial Society and Cemetery, because we decided to build a community hall. And part of the motivation to build a community hall, which really, if you looked at the number of community halls there already were in the Slocan Valley, you would say, well, why would anybody build a new one? But we were young, remember, most of us were pretty young. And what we liked to do a lot was dance. And there were problems with hiring a hall in the Slocan Valley to hold a dance, because there was two major types of halls. One group of halls wouldn't rent to us because we were the damned hippies, and the other group of halls would rent to us, but if there was a funeral, you got preempted. So much for the rock and roll band that we just brought in from Vancouver. So, anyhow, because we were here in this place, in the Slocan Valley, and not in Proctor, and not in the Cusp, and not in the Kootenai, the Okanagan, or any other rural community that we might have ended up in, but we ended up in this one. We all had copies of the Mother Earth News. That's how some of us got here. One person came and passed on the word, and the Mother Earth News and other people came.
Before emails. Yeah.
Way before emails. So there were some deaths in the community. Even though we were mostly young, there were some accidental deaths amongst us people. There were some infant deaths. And at that time, it was clear to us that we needed a cemetery. The Doukhobor cemeteries, which existed in Slocan Valley, had on a number of occasions kindly offered the bereaved families a place to bury their dead. But there just wasn't enough room in any of those cemeteries for them to take care of on an ongoing basis anybody but their own membership. So in the around 1907, the Doukhobor people moved to this area from Saskatchewan, and by the early 1920s there were communities established in Crescent Valley, in Coe-Siding, in Winlaw, and in Perry Siding. And there were also cemeteries established in those communities. The one that I live next door to, just down the road from Craig and Lois, is the Winlaw one, and it's no longer in use. But the other cemeteries, and also one in Crestova, the other cemeteries are still in use in this area by the Doukhobor community. So coming here and having these active cemeteries, and now Craig has just told me that I'm halfway through my time, and I am nowhere close to halfway through my story, so I better hurry up. So anyhow, we had this example of cemeteries in the community that were still being operated by the people who lived here. And in many other parts of rural North America, the rural cemeteries that used to be operated by the rural people were no longer in existence. And so in 1977, I was part of a group of people that was looking for a cemetery that we could, a piece of ground where we could put a cemetery. In 1977, I went with Gretchen Pratt and my infant daughter to Argenta, to where the Friends community had started the cemetery in the 1950s when they had come here as war resistors from the Korean War in America, and met with John and Helen Stevenson. And they took us to their cemetery in Argenta and showed us around and talked to us and told us stories about their cemetery, and basically told us how when they had come in the 1950s, they had learned from the Doukhobor people how to go about burying their own dead, you know, under the BC law and carrying that out. And we then learned many things from the Quakers as well. But we just couldn't find the right piece of ground. There were various people who would donate some ground for a cemetery, but it was either too rocky or there was some other problem with it, that there wasn't a suitable site. In 1980, Gretchen, who'd gone up with me to Argenta in 1977, tragically died. She drowned when she was in Africa with her family. And her body was going to be coming back to Canada to be buried here. We desperately wanted to bury her in our own cemetery. And so on April the 17th, she died. On April the 19th, our current, at the time, regional director, Corky Evans, and our former regional director, Norman Brewster, went to the regional district and started talking to people about how we could get a piece of crown land that was in Winlaw be turned into a cemetery. And so through the good graces of many civil servants in various ministries and agencies of the government, and I'll name them for you: Ministry of Lands, the Ministry of Forests, the Ministry of Highways, Mining, Health, the Agricultural Land Commission, and the RDCK were all involved. And that's an important part, to know that there were all of these people from all of these government ministries involved in transferring this piece of land from the provincial government to the regional district of Central Kootenai, who still owns it. It's a public cemetery in Winlaw. And by April the 25th, Corky and his partner Bernie, who were logging together at the time, cleared a small clearing and stumped and plowed and seeded a piece of ground. A grave was dug, and on April the 27th, and Gretchen's body actually arrived back from Africa. We went with a pickup truck to the Castlegar airport and picked her up and brought her up and buried her in Winlaw. In those 10 days, we had created a cemetery. And we were extremely grief-struck because Gretchen was a beloved person in our community. She was a little bit older. She had a good 10 years on most of us. And so she was kind of a mother figure to many of us. Her kids were getting close to being grown up. They weren't too much younger than many of us. And she had been a school teacher in the school. And to lose her was devastating to us. But we were always also very, very proud that we had done this. However, Jenny Ash, who lives close to the cemetery that we had created, somewhere along the way, and there had been 2 or 3 other burials in the meantime. And we had some question about cemeteries that we wanted answered. And she was investigating, and she found some reference to something called the BC Cemeteries Division. She said, oh, well, these are just the people. I'll phone them up and ask them. They'll know the answer to this. So she phoned them up and said, hi, I'd like to know such and such. And they said, well, what cemetery are you calling in regard to? And she said, oh, the one in Winlaw. And they looked at their map with the little flags of push pins pushed in, and they replied, well, there isn't a cemetery in Winlaw. And she said, oh, yes, there is. I live right up behind me, and we've got 3 people buried there. Well, not only were their feathers ruffled, their shirts in a knot, their knickers twisted, their noses were definitely out of joint, because not only had this bunch of you people in the Slocan Valley ignored their existence, but those 7 government agencies and ministries had also gone over their heads without so much as a by your leave from them, who have to give permission to have a cemetery. And they told us, and I quote, if burials have been made, they are illegal. The body should be exhumed and moved to a proper cemetery. Well, let me tell you, there may have been somewhat divided community. I think I forgot to tell you that there were 3 main divisions. There was the U people, there was the Anglos, or Anglique, depending on which of the other groups you belong to, and there were the Doukhobors, right? But then they were fairly rigid little groups at that time, but nothing like attack from outside to bring everybody together. And so there were petitions, and there were letters, and there were support from the entire Valley community for our cemetery. Put enough political pressure on it that they were forced to backtrack a little bit and say, well, okay, if you jump through the right number of hoops and dot the right number of I's and cross the right number of T's, we'll eventually let you be a proper cemetery. So we filled out forms and drew up maps and whatnot. And even though the lines might not be quite as straight as the ones that we put in for the maps that we submitted, they did in 1983 finally deem us a proper cemetery. However, they didn't ignore us completely. In 1985, we received a letter that said, and I again quote, on June the 5th, 1985, a cemetery's officer inspected the Dubon Creek Cemetery. It is presumed that you wish to keep the cemetery in a natural state. If this presumption is in error, the cemetery needs to have the grass cut. So, one of the problems with our cemetery is also being one of the really nice things about it. it's provided both highs and lows for us. And that is that we don't have proper road access. In fact, we don't really have road access at all. We have to go past one of the neighbors' front doors in order to drive a car to it. And so, of course, in the winter conditions, this can really be a problem. Some of the positives is that there was somebody died, and they decided that they would take his body into the cemetery with a horse-drawn sled. And there was also one time a funeral held in the cemetery that the mourners decided to walk in the long way rather than the short way because it would give more people a chance to be pallbearers, right? To have shifts, more people would have an opportunity because everybody wanted to be part of that. But it also has, you know, provided a lot of difficulties too, especially in the winter. There's been some times, and people that, you know, elderly people or people that have mobility concerns, it's not always easy. There's also the question of biker-type gangs roaring in on their motorcycles at inopportune times. And then there's the relations from the city. People have died and been buried in our cemetery in Winlaw for whom our cemetery is just a tad too rural an experience for them, especially if they're going up in high heels. So on that note, I wish to say that we are actually this summer planning to put a real road into the cemetery. And I was phoning the membership a while ago to tell them about our plans for the cemetery road and also for a new opening, because when the first opening was made, it was quite a small opening. And casting our eyes over it 27 years later, we realized that there isn't room for all of us in that opening, so we need to have more space. So we're financing the road in large part by taking some trees out. And so before I did that, I was phoning the membership to let them know what the board was contemplating doing, and basically to get everybody's buy-in on the question. And one of our members said to me, she said, "A road? We're going to have a real road?" She says, "It's going to be like we're going to be grown-ups." Have I got the 2-minute mark yet? Okay. I have one last story to tell you, and Rita, I have to tell this story because Rita told me she'd heckle me if I didn't tell you this story. But in the year 2000, there were several people up in the cemetery doing a cleanup before the fall, and it had dwindled down. There had been a few other people there, but it had dwindled down to a group of either 5 or 6 women, basically of my stature and vintage. And we had noticed, and a couple of us had noticed earlier in the year, that there was a stick sort of sticking in the middle of the open area where there were no graves, but eventually the line of graves would come there. But the turf had been disturbed, and there was this stick, just a branch out of the wood, stuck in there. The sort of thing you might imagine a kid waiting for his mom or dad to do something rather just sort of sticking it in. Then we looked closely, and you could see that it had actually been shoveled. And so we started speculating about, did somebody bury something? Because of course, you know, as opposed to other places, you're not supposed to bury things in cemeteries unless you have permission. You know, you can go in your own woods and bury your pet bird, but you're not supposed to do it in a cemetery. And we had various speculations, some of which we voiced and some of which we just kept inside our own heads. And we decided we needed to investigate. So we went over to the shed and pulled out a shovel, and I took the shovel and turned over this piece of turf, which was sort of loosened on most of it, and just flipped it back. And then I put the shovel in the next into the ground, and there was this clank of metal on metal. And I'm saying to myself, Simpson, why do you do these things? Now you're going to have to see what we've just clanked against. And so we didn't take too much. The container, which more or less is the size and shape of a paint container, heavy cardboard outside and metal ends. And it was cremated remains. And they'd only been there a couple of months or so at the most. And so the label on it from the crematorium in Kelowna was still readable. And there was a Karameus funeral home name, and the crematorium in Kelowna, and the name of the deceased person, Samuel Dinsmore O'Neill. And nobody had any idea who Samuel was or who had put him there. And so we took his remains and we put them in the cemetery. We eventually, the same group of us, gave him a proper burial in an appointed cremated remains space later on. But I deputize you all as researchers. We have done various things to try and find out something about Samuel Dinsmore O'Neill. I believe he came from Saskatchewan, and that's where the Dinsmore came in. I have no idea. This is completely in my fantasy land. But I have all sorts of stories about Samuel Dinsmore O'Neill, and if I ever find out the real one, I may or may not be disappointed, because in my mind, he was an elderly person when he died, and he had been single all his life. He had never married. And so consequently, some young grandnephew, who was a tree planter, had come into possession of his remains, and they were traveling in the back of his truck, and his mother and father were no longer alive, and he had his great uncle's cremated remains, and he just didn't know what to do with them. And one evening, while traveling through Winlaw, he stopped at what would then be the Hungry Wolf, and was maybe over a couple of beers, along with his burritos, talking to some of his other tree planting buddies about these cremated remains. And they said, oh, well, why don't you just go bury them? We got a cemetery up there. You could just go bury them there. And so he went up there and he healed in Samuel. He sure didn't bury him very deep. But there's a lot of stories about our cemetery, and 20 minutes is nowhere close enough. But I guess the thing that I want to say, too, is more than a cemetery. We formed what was called a burial society. And so, although anybody can be buried in the cemetery, it's very inexpensive, probably the cheapest burial in British Columbia, you can purchase a grave space and be buried there. If you're a member of the Burial Society, we help each other as a community when somebody dies to help the bereaved family conduct private funeral arrangements. And so it's not just a cemetery, but it's all of the care of the person after somebody has died. We don't hire commercial funeral providers, we do it ourselves. And this is a tradition that has come to us from both the Doukhobor and the Argenta communities in terms of looking after our own. And I always say it's part of the home birth movement. Neither birth nor death are a medical event. They're a natural part of each end of our lives as we know it. And that we want to be the ones who do for the people that we love and care about. And that not instead of being a weird or strange thing, which many people in mainstream North America would deem it to be, to lay out the body at home after somebody's died and then to leave it there for a day or two until you take it to the cemetery to bury it, is so foreign to most of North American culture and weird and certainly something that nobody would want to do. Indeed, it is the thing that when you do it, you find out it is the way to do. And when somebody dies that you care about, you want to be the person to look after them, and you want to be the person and not give away that power and give away that connection. And that we keep the connection as a community, we keep that connection to the land by recycling our carbon back into it.